Hi, everybody. Welcome to our first BC NEIHR-IMN Zoom talk. We're very excited for Julianne's presentation. My name is Tara Erb, and I'm the network coordinator for the BC NEIHR. We also have Jess with us.
Hey everyone, my name is Jess, like Tara said, and I'm network coordinator for the IMN-PN.
We also have with us Caitlin, who's the BC NEIHR admin assistant. She's going to be letting people in as well as helping us with the discussion. So I'll pass it on to Julianne, who will give her presentation, which will be about 20 minutes. After that, we'll have time for questions and answers, about 10 minutes. You can choose to either type in your questions in the chat box, and Jess and I will ask them on your behalf, or raise your hand, and Caitlin will unmute you for your question and then mute you again. Okay, I'll pass it on.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Tara, Jess, and Caitlin. And I'd like to just thank everyone for attending. Looking forward to speaking to you today and hearing some of your thoughts, ideas, and some questions after the presentation. So let's get it started. So today I'll be discussing my project, Blending Together Traditional and Western Knowledge to Improve Diabetes and Obesity Clinical Health Outcomes in Urban Indigenous Communities. So I nicknamed this going forward the Point of Care Project. So let's continue. So first off, I do want to respectfully acknowledge that I do work and live within the ancestral, traditional, and ceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan Nation, as well as the Thompson and Okanagan Métis chartered communities. So I was born and raised on this beautiful land. However, my family ties are from Chicane First Nation. So I am Ojibwe. My family lives on Manitoulin Island. From my mother's side, I do have some French Canadian, and I do have some Russian and Scottish on my father's side. So I do want to, I guess I haven't said my name, but I'm sure Caitlin and Tara and Jess did. But once again, my name's Julianne Barry. So I am a postdoctoral fellow currently. I've always been really interested in diabetes, obesity, and health promotion, and especially within Indigenous communities. So I did start my graduate degree more in the biology, biochemical, molecular biology, but it wasn't really for me sitting in a lab and a cell culture day after day. So moving to my PhD, I was able to actually work with human participants, which was super exciting to actually improve and hear how research actually improves the lives of people. So within my PhD, I was able to work with my current supervisor, Dr. Donna Kurtz, on one of the initial projects with our communities, and just fell in love with the project. So was very honored and proud to be a postdoctoral fellow for the newest research project, which I will chat about today. So I would like to first acknowledge and thank the community partnerships. So the community members, the community research liaisons, community advisory teams, and our center executive directors of our 6 Friendship and Métis centers. Special thanks and great acknowledgement to our elder Jesse Nyberg and elder Jane Taylor, my supervisor Donna Kurtz, and the rest of the individuals and my great colleagues from the Indigenous Health Promotion and Cultural Safety Lab. I'd like to acknowledge the project is partnered with UBC and Interior Health as well, and very grateful for my funding for postdoctoral fellow from the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, as well as for the Michael Smith Foundation for Health Research. So jumping in Canada, we have 1 in 3 adults living with diabetes or pre-diabetes today. Alongside this, we have about 6 in 10 adults who live with excess weight. We do know that within Indigenous peoples or Indigenous communities, the rates of diabetes are 3 to 5 times higher. The age of diagnosis is younger. The rates have tripled for children. Gestational diabetes or diabetes within pregnancy are 2 to 3 times higher. The prevalence is greater in females compared to males. And this is actually opposite the general population. And the complications are higher and more severe. Looking at obesity as well, we can see compared to the general population, those Indigenous people living off reserve, so urban Indigenous people, do have greater rates of obesity, both within adults and within children. So we know that obesity and diabetes in Indigenous people are not just related to lifestyle and genetic factors, but also the historic and contemporary impacts of colonization. So urban or off-reserve Indigenous communities often have less access to culturally relevant and traditional health and wellness services. Due to this, these urban Indigenous people do not access or return to these Western or mainstream health services. This often results in the progression and severity of illness and disease. In order to make these services within diabetes, obesity, and other healthcare services to actually improve the health and wellness of Indigenous peoples, they need to be holistic, culturally relevant, Indigenous-led, as well as community-driven. So to reduce the gaps, research, education, healthcare, health policy, and practice need to be based on the experiences of Indigenous people, the inclusion of Indigenous voice, decision-making by and with Indigenous peoples, and the inclusion of Indigenous as well as Western knowledge within chronic disease prevention and treatment. Embracing a vision for Indigenous health was a CIHR-funded project in 2015. It was partnered with UBC Interior Health and 3 friendship centers within the BC Interior. So within this project, communities were asked, what are healthcare services like for Indigenous people in relation to diabetes and being overweight within their local community? What is needed to include both Western and traditional diabetes and obesity health and healing services within the local urban community? And lastly, how can these changes be made in the local urban communities? So using talking circles, information was gathered. 2 talking circles took place within each community. The first talking circle was community members only. And based on feedback and talking to the communities, the second talking circle included both community members as well as local healthcare providers. And within those talking circles, these 3 questions were asked. What communities said? So the communities identified ways to blend together traditional and Western health services to address those diagnosable health concerns, as well as more importantly, the social, emotional, and spiritual roots of the poor health and wellness. The collective vision of our communities within the project identified access to care, health education, cultural safety, community belonging and learning together, food security and nutrition education, and traditional healing. Some barriers did come up, and those include racism and the Western approach. So of course, getting those priorities and needs from the community was great and so crucial and important, but we really needed to build upon these. So working with the communities and expanding to 4 further communities, we started to build and act on this vision. So this brings me to the Building Indigenous Pathways for Diabetes and Obesity Prevention and Management with Urban and Rural Communities in BC. A bit of a mouthful, so it was nicknamed the Indigenous Diabetes Obesity Health Project, or the IDO2 project. So fortunately, we were able to expand to 6 centers. So 3 previous centers were still involved, and then 3 more centers. So we have 6 Friendship Center and Métis Center partners involved. The purpose of the study is to work with urban Indigenous Friendship and Métis Center communities, the research team, and collaborators to identify ways to include holistic traditional health practices in the prevention, the treatment, and management of diabetes and obesity across the generations, to plan and develop community programs that are culturally relevant, community-led, and that benefit families and communities, and to implement these locally driven, culturally safe community programs that include both the traditional and Western practices for diabetes and obesity health and wellness care. So the aim of the project is to bridge local, traditional, and Western knowledge to improve diabetes and obesity health and wellness services in urban Indigenous communities. So our project, or the IDO2 project, is guided and led by Indigenous methodologies. So Indigenous-led research by and for Indigenous peoples, shaped by Indigenous knowledge. That's local knowledge, tradition, life experiences, stories, and visions. It is respectful, relevant, culturally appropriate, and collective, and it's beneficial to the lives of Indigenous peoples. Our IDO2 project is also guided by two-eyed seeing. This acknowledges and respects the Western or academic and Indigenous worldviews. So two-eyed seeing is to see from one eye with the strengths of Indigenous knowledges and ways of knowing, and from the other eye with the strengths of Western knowledges and ways of knowing, and to use both these eyes together for the benefit of all. So this was a quote by Mi'kmaq elder Albert Marshall. So our project is crucial within community engagement. From our 2015 vision to this new IDO2 project, the communities have been involved in all of those steps, from the funding applications to putting the programs together, to all the different meetings, the knowledge sharing, absolutely every step. So we do engage our center executive directors, center staff, community members. We have a community research liaison. So this community research liaison, or the CRL, as they are called, are project research assistants who are hired by each center. So there are 6 of them in total. They are local community members, so they're familiar with the center and familiar with the people who access the center. We do provide training and mentorship from the UBC team to increase capacity building, to increase their knowledge within the scope of research, amongst lots of other professional development opportunities and activities. Each center also has a community advisory team. So at each center, the CAP team, as we call them, provide knowledge, guidance, and they make sure to maintain the respect, relevance, reciprocity, and responsibility within the whole project. So that's the community, UBC, Interior Health, and our funding agency to make sure that we're meeting all of those guidelines. Our community advisory team at each center consists of an elder, a knowledge keeper, a health provider, a community member, traditional healer, center staff, and a youth. We do have ex officio members, so our center executive director, the community research liaison, and the UBC researchers as well. So this brings me to the Indigenous Diabetes and Obesity Health, or the IDO2. So the IDO2, there are lots of components, but I do want to speak to you about the community programs. So within IDO2, the communities form these community programs. So using talking circles and community gatherings, we get information to develop the community program. At that step, our community program is co-developed by our community research liaisons, our UBC and Interior Health research team, and it's always guided by each site community advisory team. So once the community program plan has been developed, finalized, reviewed, and okayed by the community advisory team, they are facilitated within the community. So our community programs within each site ideally takes place 2 times per year over about a 3-year span. It's organized and facilitated by our fantastic community research liaisons. Our community program typically looks like this. So we have a sign-up day. At the sign-up day, consent has gone over, obtained. There are some measures completed. So this is blood pressure, waist circumference. Weight is an optional one for the participants as well. Surveys are completed as well. We usually have about 6 weekly sessions. These are more educational sessions. So at each session, we have a Western healthcare provider, as well as an Indigenous presenter or the Indigenous perspective. So this is acknowledging that two-eyed seeing within each of our sessions, as well as there's an activity. So this could be traditional, cultural, could be a type of physical activity. So it's really based on what the community members' priorities and needs were. So there's been quite a few, whether it's just walking around the block, there's been events where learning how to bead. So there's been some really great activities, and very excited to move forward to see more of these activities as we get more feedback from our community members. The final day includes measures as well as surveys. About 3 months following our final program day or final program week, we do have a follow-up talking circle as well as some follow-up measures. So we do get feedback right away about the program at the final day, but we find it really important at that 3-month period to see and look at more of those long-term impacts on our community members' health. So this is why we do the 3-month follow-up talking circle. Okay, so this has all led me up to my postdoctoral research. So the sub-study is the point of care project. So all of the adults who are taking part in the IDO2 program are invited to take part in this point of care project. If they are interested, they speak with me, we go through all the details, go through consent. And what happens is alongside that community program, there are measures before, after, and at the 3-month mark. This includes HbA1c, so this is hemoglobin A1c. It's a marker of what blood sugar has looked like over the past 3 months. We also have a lipid panel. So these are the fats that are usually found in your blood, like cholesterol, as well as glucose or blood sugar. The waist circumference and blood pressure measurements are also used within the point of care project. So all of these measures are done before, after, and at 3 months. You will notice that our lipid panel or those blood fats aren't done at the after measures. And this is just because at that point of time, it's only been about 6 to 8 weeks. And sometimes that shorter period, there might be some changes in blood fats that aren't actually representing what's happening in the body. So that's why we measure them at the 3-month mark instead. So what's really cool is with the point of care project, we get to use a point of care machine. So this is the one that I use in the project, as well as a glucometer. So by using these 2 machines, we can measure the hemoglobin A1c, the blood fats, as well as the blood sugar. And this takes a very short amount of period. For example, the hemoglobin A1c takes about 3 minutes to complete. The lipids take about 8 minutes, and the glucose is pretty well instantaneous. So by doing this, I can put all of these results onto a health measures and actually show this to the participant, go through all of the measures with them, and be able to discuss them. So they can sit down and ask me questions. So oftentimes when people in the community go get this done, those results aren't available. And even when they become available, they're not readily able to be discussed. So this has been great for the participants. So I just want to show you an example of your health measures. So you can see here, the health measure gives a bit of a summary. That way participants can bring this home, read it over, and kind of remember what the measure was. And then all of their measures kind of go in here so they can bring it home and have a look at it. So it just kind of continues. And like I know personally, oftentimes we have reflections and questions that we really want to follow up with our doctor, our healthcare physician, nurse, but oftentimes we forget it or we feel rushed, so we don't remember to ask those questions. So I really want the participants that if there are anything they want to ask about these measures, anything that comes up, to write them down. And that way, when they come to see me at the follow-up and the 3-month measures, they have it all written down and it's easy for them to remember to ask me. So I also wanted to show you, so I use this in my study. So I show the participants this. I would say the majority of my participants know how to take a finger prick, either because they do on a regular basis or they have a family member who does. But it's so important to make sure that all of our participants feel comfortable, know what they're doing, and have that opportunity and time to ask questions and have those questions answered about what's actually taking place, and there's no surprises. So this is the document that I have and show all the participants, go through it, make sure everyone feels comfortable before taking that blood sample. And so the blood sample either goes into the glucometer or that point of care machine, and it's simply just from a finger prick. So it's really cool. A few times it takes a couple finger pricks, but we make sure that participants feel comfortable. And if they don't want to move forward with all the measures, they don't have to. So I usually would show this first, but it fit better over here. So the hypothesis of the point of care project is that bridging traditional knowledge into the community programs will improve diabetes and obesity related clinical variables. So whether that be hemoglobin A1C, those blood fats, or sugar, as well as waist circumference and blood pressure. So I have two aims of my point of care project. The first is to measure the effects of interventions or those community programs on diabetes and obesity clinical variables. And the second one is to determine whether changes in these clinical variables are related to the community program attendance. So if participants come to more sessions, do they see better results? Or if they come to more programs, do they see better results, and vice versa? So the point of care project is informed by communities' recommendations. We get feedback, or have gotten feedback from participants, community research liaisons, community advisory teams, those center executive directors. It's less invasive than phlebotomy completed at a local lab or hospital. So it's nicer, it's just a finger prick versus a needle sample. And it's completed within the Urban Indigenous Center. So Indigenous people and community members state they feel more comfortable and more culturally safe within the center. And it's really nice because it's immediately available. And this encourages ownership of diabetes and obesity prevention and/or management. So could including traditional knowledge into diabetes and obesity health services actually work? So there's really not that much evidence out there that's readily easy to find, but Diabetes in My Nation is a very cool community-based diabetes prevention and management program. It was in 2008 to 2009. I would really encourage everyone to check out the link. There's so many aspects to the program. There's great learning videos that you can share with community members, with family around diabetes and obesity management and prevention. So this is their framework, but yeah, so it's a huge program. So I do encourage you to more check that out. What I would like to show is that they did look at A1C, so that blood sugar over the last 3 months, systolic blood pressure, and LDL, which is just a blood fat. So they wanted to see whether having traditional knowledge and practices improve these. So you can see within each graph that it is showing the percent of observations under 7%, for example, less than or equal to 130 over 80, and then less than 2.5 millimoles. Basically what this is, it's just showing the observations that are in the good range. So if you go get this blood work done, if it's under these values, then you're considered in a normal range. So what's very cool is that over the year, all three of these measures, we saw the observations in that good range actually increase. So I did want to show as well, because they did have so many aspects to this project, that Diabetes My Nation had increased awareness of diabetes and its prevention. They had changes in lifestyle, improved diabetes management. They had improved relations between communities with their local healthcare systems, empowerment of the communities to manage their healthcare programs, and showed that participants could take ownership of their disease, its prevention and management, which is fantastic and what we'd love to see with the Point of Care project. So this further supports the critical need to explore the effects of bridging together that traditional and Western practices on improving diabetes and obesity health and wellness. So the point of care project progress so far, we did start in March 2020. We had about 20 participants, so 10 participants from 2 of the centers. So I do apologize. I should have mentioned earlier, due to it being a postdoctoral fellow research study, I do have minimal funds for the specific sub-study. So we were able to offer it directly to 2 of the centers we work with. This is the Métis Community Services Society of BC within Kelowna and the Kilauna Friendship Society. So within only 2 communities, but hopefully to blossom out to all 6. So we did start in March 2020, 20 participants, so 10 from each of these 2 sites. However, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we did unfortunately have to stop the research. But anecdotally, it was well received. I would say the majority, if not all of the participants who took place in the IDO2 community programs wished to take part. There were actually a few people that wanted to do their measures, and we had scheduled it for the next week, but unfortunately due to COVID-19, we did have to cancel those. There was lots of positive feedback about the immediate availability of the results. And the participants really liked having the Your Health Measures result. They had their health measures written down, given to them to keep. I know lots of people said, I get to keep this. And I said, yes, please bring it. So that was great to see. We are aiming for a research resumption with our centers in January or February, based on the centers as well as the provincial health orders. So fingers crossed. So to conclude, there is less access to culturally relevant and traditional wellness services for many urban Indigenous peoples. This shows and results in them not accessing or returning to those Western mainstream health services. It often and quite likely results in the progression and increased severity of health challenges. The project aims are to bridge together those traditional and Western practices, so locally informed and culturally relevant, and to increase access to diabetes and obesity healthcare services within a culturally safe space. So ideally, our project outcomes would be to reduce diabetes and obesity health inequities, and to provide evidence to support change in policy, research, and practice. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for listening and open up to any thoughts and questions.
Thanks, Julianne. I just wanted to say, I don't know if you noticed, and that was great. I don't know if you noticed in the chat box, Scott said, thank you and great project. He just had to leave early, but yeah.
Perfect, awesome, thank you.
Looks like Carol has a question. If I can unmute her and she can ask her question. One moment.
Hi, Julianne. That was a fabulous presentation. Thank you so much. So I'm actually an instructor for Douglas College. I'm a certified lactation consultant, and I teach in their breastfeeding courses through Douglas College, which is basically we get a lot of nurses, nursing students, doulas, physicians, etc. I'm actually based out of Winnipeg, so that is Treaty Territory #1 right now. But we, Douglas has been getting a lot of questions from our students around having an more of an Indigenous component to our breastfeeding support, and particularly from an ally perspective. So I've been asked to kind of start looking at what are some of the components of a course, and I love the idea of the two-eyed seeing approach, and I think the way you've been able to put that together as an example for your diabetes intervention program is fabulous. And I'm starting to see it pop up more and more. So I'm very excited about exploring that as a way of presenting breastfeeding support from the traditional and Western medicine point of view. So I just wondered, I guess, especially with diabetes, we're looking at some of the stats that are coming up now that, breastfeeding can actually decrease the incidence of type 2 diabetes for up to 50%. So it's some amazing stats. And I don't know, I took a quick look at your website while you were talking, but I couldn't really see anything specific right away in terms of this kind of approach for, let's say, pregnant and breastfeeding people. But have you had any experience with that approach with that particular population? Or
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Carol. Unfortunately, we haven't within the scope of our project, but it's a super interesting to hear you say that, because I've heard those stats and I've seen so many great things about breastfeeding with the scope of diabetes in the future. So unfortunately, we haven't. Most of our programs right now really have only attracted lots of our elders, which is fantastic, but it really hasn't attracted too many of our youth, our young families with children. We are hoping that as we move forward within this research project, as well as some other related research projects, that we can use some of the strengths of our centers. So for example, we do have a center in North Okanagan Friendship Center Society, which has a very strong prenatal program. So we're hoping to move forward in that sense where we can use that prenatal program, hopefully to bring in this two-eyed seeing model and to run those programs either separately, but more likely alongside the existing programs. So unfortunately, I don't have any insight for you today, but if you are looking into doing that, the best way would be to start with some community engagement. So if there are centers, nations that have programs, which many of them do with prenatal breastfeeding, to see if there are elders or knowledge holders that could help you within the scope of your course or your program.
Thank you so much for your question. I see that Judith also has a question, so I will unmute her. Hi, Judith, you're still muted. I've asked you to unmute, so you might just have to click a button here.
There we go. How's that?
Perfect,
Can
thank
you hear
you.
me?
Yes.
Lost the mouse. I'm in a bit of sunshine here in my car. I just wanted to say thanks, Julianne, for that. That was great. I have some colleagues and a community who's hoping to join the next granting program for the research. So listening to you was terrific to get some ideas and see what you've done. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Judith, and good luck with your programming and grant going forward.
Thank you.
Do we have anybody else who has a question or comment?
Julianne, you see the comment in the section there? Okay.
Just having a look. So Carol, yeah, do you have any suggestions how to reflect the community involvement when we have students across Canada? That one I don't have too much experience with, but I know we have a collaborator on the project. You may have heard his name, Dr. Malcolm King. I know he's starting to do a lot more virtual, I don't know if they're meetings or some kind of circles with lots of their students who are across Canada. So Dr. Malcolm King may be a good contact to see how he's doing that. I know we were chatting about that with one of our other grants, so we're hoping to chat with Malcolm a bit more about how to do that.
And just to throw a comment in there as well, alongside that, Carol, many like ICCO, so Indigenous Communities collectives or organizations, thinking of organizations, do serve regionally, provincially, or even nationally. So, for example, we do community engagement through our key partners, which is First Nations Health Authority, Métis Nation BC, and BC Association of Aboriginal Friendship Centers. And that kind of gives us that perspective, right? Which that might be helpful for you as well when it's just so much diversity and so many people are, geographically separated. So that's an idea as well.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments? You can either type it in the chat box or raise your hand. I will say, Julianne, that I absolutely loved your presentation. It is phenomenal to get the results so quickly and to have it culturally safe and on Indigenous people's terms, by Indigenous and for Indigenous people. So I just wanted to say personally, Haichka, thank you.